أحمدك يا ربي حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه وأصلي وأسلم على صفوة خلقك على سيد الأولين والآخرين أما بعد. All praise and blessings are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we send salutations and blessings upon the noble Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The greatest blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon us has been the ni'mah and the blessing of this deen that you and I follow, the deen that you and I are adherents to, the deen of Islam. And today's topic, although it may sound like a mouthful, dispelling delusions, it is a very grave and important matter of its own. And that today's topic is relevant to the time that you and I are living in. SubhanAllah, it's the profound miracle of this deen, it's the profound miracle of this Quran, that Islam is relevant to every age group. It's relevant to every age group, it's relevant to every time, it's relevant to every place. That the relevance of Islam has shown itself time and time again throughout the past 1400 years. And it is simply upon you and I to look at the signs. And that in today's topic, we see that the world that you and I we live in, every single thing that we know is part of this world. Every single thing that you and I love is part of this world. That from the friends that we have, to the families that we spend our time with, to the food that we eat, to the clothes that we wear, the places that we live, every single thing is part of this dunya. And we have invested so much into this dunya. We've invested so much into this dunya. And how could we not, when it's all that you and I apparently know? But what if we were told that this investment that we've made is a terrible one? That this investment that we've so blindly made is one that does not have a good outcome? What if it was to be told that this investment that we've made will leave us in debt? That I would like to begin, and as usually I like to start off with either an account from the lives of the prophets or from the lives of the companions to sort of draw a parallel. And although this story has been narrated before, it's still relevant as it was on the day that it occurred. And the story that I love to mention, especially to the youth sitting in the crowd, especially to all the students and to the adults as well, it's the story that is very relevant. It's the story of Mus'ab ibn Umayr radiyallahu anhu. Now, the reason why I enjoy mentioning his story is because Mus'ab ibn Umayr radiyallahu anhu was an individual, was a beloved companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Mecca. And he was an individual who was young. He was rich and he was handsome. In terms of this world, you could say that he had it all. He had popularity. He had wealth. He had anything in terms of this world, anything that you wanted, he had. And it was said that Mus'ab ibn Umayr radiyallahu anhu was so rich that he had what you and I would call a designer fragrance. He had a designer cologne. That his scent was so known that when he would leave the market, just by smelling that fragrance, people would know that Mus'ab ibn Umayr had just left the markets. That scent was specified to Mus'ab ibn Umayr, that they knew it was his. That's how wealthy he was. And it was said, upon accepting Islam, for Mus'ab ibn Umayr, everything changed. That he went from an individual who had it all, from somebody who had it all. Anything he wanted in this world, you name it, he had it. And it is said that after he accepted Islam, that his mother would chain him to the house so that he wouldn't leave. That the idea, this thought of him accepting Islam was so bad in the sight of his mother that she would chain him up to the house so that he wouldn't leave. And it's said that Musab ibn Umayr became the poorest of poor individuals afterward. That he lost it all. That going from the peak, and he went all the way in terms of dunya, he lost it all. And if we see the culmination of his life, and we see the end of his life, and that he was martyred in the battle of Uhud, and it said in narrations that when it was time to bury Musab ibn Umayr, that he didn't own more than a single sheet of cloth, such that if you were to bring it to cover his feet would be exposed. And if we were to use it to cover his feet, his face would be exposed. This is the state that Musab ibn Umayr left his dunya in. However, what do we say about such an individual? What do we say about the Sahaba? When we say the name of a companion, what do you and I say? We say, radiyallahu anhu. Radiyallahu anhu. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was pleased with them. Look at it in terms of dunya. Let's look at it according to you and I, our standards. What did he have in terms of education? What degree did he have? What job did he have? What retirement plan did Musab ibn Umayr have? What stocks was he invested in? What luxurious car did he have? Where did he live? These are the standards that you and I have for success, right? How did he leave this world? Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is because it begs the question. When you look at the story of Musab ibn Umayr, when you look at the accounts of the Sahaba, when you look at the accounts of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the question that comes to you and us, the question that comes to us is what? Why? How could they do this? How did they live their lives in such a manner? How did they live their lives that you and I were also living this life? Why is it when we read their stories, they didn't hesitate to do what they had to do? But if you and I were to think about even doing one single action like that, what happens? Immediately our heart squeezes. We feel this cold sensation. Leaving this world? Not pursuing the blessings and bounties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us? I am not even speaking about in a haram manner. I'm speaking about in a halal manner. Imagine if any of us were to realize or to be told that you will die in poverty. The thought of this scares us. Imagine if you and I were to be told today that when we die, we will not have a single penny in our pockets. Immediately, what do we feel? Imagine you and I were to pass away and nobody in this world loved us. How does your heart feel? That you and I were to leave this world and nobody cared for us. That's it. Who was he? Fulan, we don't worry about him, we don't know. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in, the reason that they were able to live the way they lived is because they understood the reality of this dunya. The reality that is mentioned in the Quran, in the Hadith, over and over again. And a certain fragment from the Quran which I want us to look at are the ayahs in Surah Hadid. And it starts with بَعْدَ مَا أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ اعْلَمُوا أَنَّمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا لَعِبٌ وَلَهْوٌ وَزِينَةٌ وَتَفَاخُرٌ بَيْنَكُمْ وَتَكَاثُرٌ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ. That this is the first ayah I want us to look at. And the translation of this is know. That it's told to us, to insan, that know that this worldly life is what? The words that are used is what? It's la'ib. It's play. It's just la'ib. Walahun. And it's amusement. And what is it? وَزِينَةٌ وَتَفَاخُرٌ بَيْنَكُمْ وَتَكَاثُرٌ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ. And it's a show of beauty. It's an exchange of boastful claims between us and other individuals. And it's a competition in terms of riches, in terms of wealth and children. That the reality of this dunya is that it's just competition. It's boasting. It's showing off. It's saying, I have this. Whatever I have is better than yours. My watch is better than your watch. My shoes are better than your shoes. My clothes are better than your clothes. My topi is better than your topi. My hat is better than yours. That's what happens. That's what this life is. And if we take a closer look, subhanAllah, if we look at it, there's a very strange parallel that's also brought into this ayah. That it shows the stages of life that you and I go through. That when we begin our lives, we start out as children. And what is life as a child? The children sitting in the audience, they know what is it? You mess around with your friends, you play, you have fun. You spend your time in amusement. You play with your friends. That life in its initial stages is what? It's laib. And then as you grow older, what happens? It turns into lahu. In your teenage years, lahu, amusement or pastimes. In your teenage years, what do you want to do? Sports, different hobbies, different pastimes. Whatever you and I, we enjoy doing, we spend our time doing that. So from laib, from playing as children, we move to our adolescence, to our teenage years, and it becomes what? Lahu. Spend our time in amusement. And if you're a teenager, for the teenagers sitting in the crowd, and for the adults as well, if you look back at your childhood, at your young age, you think, how was there a time when that's all I liked to do? That all I wanted to do was run around. And when you get a little older, you think, how was there an age when all I wanted to do was play sports? That all I wanted to do was spend hours and hours outside. And then it moves on. And when you get slightly older, when you get to this age of young adulthood, life becomes what? Zina. That you adorn yourself. We dress up. We show ourselves off. To look as appealing as we can to other individuals. How can I look the best? Zina. I need to have the best clothes. I need to have the best status. And that's what life comes into. And then there comes an age that as a man gets older, what does his life become? Just competing in who has the most wealth and the most children. That these are the stages of life. Slowly and steadily, these are the stages of life that you and I pass through. And the reality is, the irony is that when you move to each stage, the previous stage seems a bit funny. If you look back at your younger years, you think, how is there a time that this is what I like to do? That each stage, as you move through, seems more and more foolish. And this is what continues. And then a very interesting parable, a very interesting example is then continued in this ayah. The verses continue, and they say that the example of this dunya is like that of rain. The example of this dunya is like rain. And the rain, it grows vegetation. And there's crops. And these crops, they attract the farmers. Now, different words are used to describe this term. But here the usage of farmers will be used. That the farmers look at this vegetation, they look at these crops, and they see lush green crops. And they see it. But then before they can even register, it withers. It turns yellow. And then it withers away, and it becomes straw. That the reality of this world is that when you and I, we look at it, we see the beauty of this world. We see everything that this world has to offer. We look at all the fun. We look at all the pleasure, all the enjoyment. But before you and I realize it, at a moment's notice, the vegetation goes from green to yellow, and it slowly withers away. That the reality is that you and I, we think that we are going to be here forever. That in the West, it's what we call a death-denying society. We don't like to speak about death. In fact, we don't even mention it to the children. And what is so wrong with mentioning death? That inshallah, when we leave this world, we go to a far better place. That when you and I, we will leave this world. We won't be here forever. There was a time where we weren't here. And there will certainly be a time where we will no longer be here. And inshallah, we will be with Allah Azza wa Jal. What is so wrong with mentioning this concept? The thing is that you and I living here in the West, we don't like to speak about death. We don't like to mention death. Death to us is in some far off valley which doesn't exist. But Islam does not treat death in this manner. That you and I, as members of this community, as students of this madrasa, we've seen the janazah that comes. We pray the janazah salah. We go to the graveyard. We take the handfuls of dirt with our own hands and we pour it on the grave. That this is very intentionally done so that we may all understand the reality of this world. But the way that you and I live, the entire way the system is designed, when you look at our schools, you look at our workplace, you look at the hobbies we have, you look at the technologies that we use, when you look at the technologies that we use, every single one of these things takes us away from this reality. The reality is that you and I are still sleeping. We're not awake. If we were awake, we wouldn't act in the way that we do. If we were aware of what's going to happen, we would not proceed in the manner that we do. And it comes in the hadith that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentions in the hadith, فَوَاللَّهِ مَا الْفَقْرَ أَخْشَى عَلَيْكُمْ وَلَكِنِّي أَخْشَى أَن تُبْسَطَ عَلَيْكُمُ الدُّنْيَا كَمَا بُسِطَتْ عَلَى مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ فَتَنَافَسُوهَا كَمَا تَنَافَسُوهَا وَتَهْلِكَكُمْ كَمَا أَهْلَكَتْهُمْ. That the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions that I don't fear poverty upon this ummah, but rather I fear that the dunya will spread itself in front of you. And that this dunya will spread itself in front of you like it did to those in the past. And that you will compete for dunya like the ones in the past competed for dunya. And it will destroy you like it destroyed those who came before. The Prophet ﷺ did not fear poverty, although poverty does come with its trials and tribulations. The fear that he had was that dunya would overwhelm us, that we would look at the people of dunya, that we would look at the influencers, we would look at the streamers, the YouTubers, the TikTokers, the Snapchatters, the Instagrammers, we would look at the athletes, we would look at all these people and we would think, that's who I want to be like. That we would look at the people of dunya and say, that's how I want to live my life. We would look at all the cars and all the houses and all the wealth and all the fame and glory, and we would think to ourselves, this is how I want to live my life. This is what was feared for you and I. That there is hadith after hadith, narration after narration, that this is how the Sahaba lived their lives. But what about the value of this dunya according to Allah Azza wa Jal? And it's mentioned that the value of this dunya, that if this dunya was to have any value, if it was to have the value of the wing of a mosquito, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not have even given the non-believers a drop of water. That if this dunya was to have the value of the wing of a mosquito, if it had that much value, which means it doesn't, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't have even given the non-believers a drop of water. And then it begs the question, and as we wrap up, if this is the state of the dunya, and just to elaborate, if we were to compare the dunya to the akhirah, if we were to compare our lifetimes, every single thing in this world that you and I know, everything in this world, and we were to compare it to Jannah, to the hereafter, to what inshallah is promised to you and I, the example of this dunya is like the example of the person who dips his finger in the ocean. How much water comes back? Hardly a drop. That half drop, that small, barely one drop, is the example of this dunya, of this world, in comparison to the akhirah. That is the dunya that you and I are living. That is the dunya that you and I are crazy over. That is the delusion that you and I are in. How much do we invest in this world? And this is not a question that I'm simply posing to you. I include myself in this. This is a question that we all must ask ourselves. If we know nobody stays in this dunya forever, if we know that the ultimate destination is the akhirah, and if we know that this world has no value in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it begs the question, what are you and I working towards? What are we working towards? What are we striving for? What do we hope to achieve and gain? And what has this love of dunya done? And I mentioned the example of all these different social medias, and you guys know as well as I do, what kind of ridiculous things do people do for the sake of this dunya? What aren't people willing to do for this dunya? You and I, we know it all. How we're willing to cheat one another, how we're willing to lie to one another, how we're willing to deceive one another. The silly, ridiculous things that we are willing to do for the sake of this dunya. And what will this dunya give us in return? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. That is the reality that you and I are living in. And this is the reason why we have events such as the one tonight. We have these family night programs. We have these events. So that by joining these events, we can, if not for simply 30 minutes, disassociate ourselves with the dunya. At least for half an hour. Let's bring our families and cut ourselves off from this dunya. You and I are 24 hours, 7 days a week. It is in the dunya. It is in this world. Let us at the very least take some time out so that we can make more moments and have more events and have more occasions where you and I are connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because ultimately, the only thing that will save us is this deen. If you tie yourself to any other cause, you'll be left hanging. If you think success is in any other thing, you will be left at a loss. The only successful investment that you and I can and will make is one that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove the love of this dunya from our hearts. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put the love of the akhirah in our hearts. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us individuals who are successful on the last day, to make us individuals who are successful in the end. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lifts the veil from our eyes and allow us to see this world for what it truly is. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين.